So, as someone who's graduating soon, did you know you wanted to go into geopolitics when you were leaving high school, and did you go into it with the idea of becoming leader of the opposition for 5 years?
Not in the slightest. When I left school, I was in a small grammar school in Shropshire in the English Midlands, and I left school with pass grades in my 2 A-level exams I took, and that was it. So I couldn't go to university if I'd wanted to, and I volunteered to go to Jamaica to do youth work, camping work, and teaching geography in a secondary school there, which was a big jump for me, and I was I believe very fortunate in getting that offer, because I learned far more than I could possibly teach the students when I went there. And I was there for some 2 years, and it taught me a great deal about life and about the struggles that the majority black community in Jamaica have been through to try and gain independence and to gain decency in society. And from that, I'd always been pretty political. I'd been a member of the campaign for nuclear disarmament, and also involved in opposition to the Vietnam War, which was going on at that time. And then I came back to Britain and did a lot of different jobs, brief time in college, which wasn't very successful, and then worked as a political campaigner, and then I eventually got a job in the trade union movement as an organiser. So I spent 10 years as a union organiser. That drew me into politics, of course, and I was then elected to a local authority, a council in North London, Harringay, and from that I was invited to by members of the Labour Party in the constituency I now represent to be considered as the candidate. So it went through an incredibly lengthy selection process that lasted 6 months, and I was elected by selected by a majority of 4 votes, and I've been the MP for there ever since. So did I have an intention of going into politics? No, I didn't see it as a career. No, I see public representation as an obligation to represent people and to promote others and try and get others to be politically active. I don't see it as a sort of exclusive career road. Having said that, I've been there 40 years doing it. But the important thing, if colleagues of yours, young people, want to go into politics, good. Make sure they're doing it for the right reasons. They're doing it to represent others. They're doing it to bring about what they believe to be the right changes in society, because nobody is more important than the people they represent. My great friend Andrew Feinstein tells me a lovely story about Nelson Mandela. He goes into the parliamentary caucus meeting of the African National Congress. This is after he'd been released, after the Rainbow Coalition is taken over and running the country. And he has this whole meeting of the parliamentary caucus. And they're quite nervous of Mandela because he's such a figure. So he says, hands up those who think they're very important, to all the MPs. And a few hands go up. And he said, thank you. If you think you're important, you're not, because you're putting yourself above the people that put you there. So just remember that. And they then shrunk to about that height. He's right.
Yeah. Well, following the Brexit referendum in 2016, many in the Labour Party criticised you for leading a lacklustre campaign for Remain. So looking back on this now, is there anything you would have done differently at the time?
I think it's a ridiculous comment that's been made by a lot of people. They never said it at the time. The people that said that joined me on the campaign and spoke at public rallies with me on that campaign. Those that were supposed to be leading the campaign on in the Labour Party did very little themselves and hardly appeared anywhere. I was the one that did rallies and meetings all over the country. It's just nonsense. their argument was that I was not prepared to link up with the Conservatives in their campaign because I said that we should remain within the European Union, but we should reform the European Union, particularly on issues of control on state spending and state investment, particularly in strengthening the social chapter of the European Union, so that if the referendum voted yes, and at that time the expectation was that it would vote yes, that we would be within the European Union, but I would be making demands on economic justice, whereas remember the EU at that time was promoting austerity economics in Greece, Spain, Portugal and Ireland, which I opposed because austerity economics hits the poorest, not the wealthiest of our society, and I think the criticisms were actually grotesquely unfair. I did public meetings on beaches in Cornwall and with fishermen in Aberdeen and everywhere in between.
Many among us at our school plan on going to the UK for university. You said Labour planned to abolish university tuition as early as 2017. It's been 8 years since then. Do you still see it as happening in the future?
Sadly, the current Labour Party leadership dropped the policy of ending university tuition fees and also my policy of reducing fees for overseas students as well. Because it has left many students in Britain in the most massive debt, or graduates rather, in the most massive debts, typically between £50,000 and £70,000 of debts, which they have to pay off through work if they earn more than £25,000 per year. So I think it's short-sighted and we should be investing in the future. It was a controversial policy within the Labour Party, and the argument was that my proposal, which was accepted by the party, of ending tuition fees at universities and reinstating grants for maintenance whilst at university, benefited the middle classes. And I said, it doesn't. It benefits all students and gives everyone the opportunity and puts a university course on the same basis as any other course. In other words, we as a community invest in you to study, to achieve something, and we all benefit because we get a doctor, we get an engineer, we get whatever qualification that person gets. It's meant that the numbers of young people going to university is beginning to drop because they're worried about the levels of debt they're going to get into. It's meant they've got huge debts, which means it's hard for them to borrow money to do anything else in society. And because of the nasty combination of difficulties over immigration and the excessive cost for overseas students, we're losing a lot of very bright, wonderful overseas students that used to come to Britain. And so my view is that we should actually integrate ourselves as much as possible with the European education system so we get and send more and more students. What I also proposed was a bilateral agreements with a number of countries so that the mid-year of a 3-year degree course could, by arrangement, be taken at an overseas university. So I tentatively made an arrangement with the government of Mexico, for example, so that second-year students could spend a year at the National University in Mexico and vice versa in Britain. That would mean better languages, better understanding of languages, but above all, an understanding of the world as a whole. And we do that with lots of countries. And so I'm absolutely in favour of all students that can benefit from it going to university. And if they don't want to or can't go to university, then to get vocational qualifications.
So Rachel Reeves has said before that this government will be the most pro-business ever. So do you think this mindset is fundamentally incompatible with the goals of democratic socialism, and what do you think what do you think the Labour Party should stand for?
Well, they keep saying they're a very pro-business government, and they keep telling us that, but the reality is we do need some degree of public ownership in Britain, particularly of the crucial public services like mail, rail, water and energy. And that was in our manifesto, and that is overwhelmingly popular with the British public. Instead, with the exception of some rail companies, they've opted for regulation, which has shown itself to be very unsuccessful. in controlling water companies, for example. And their pro-business statements, I'm not anti-business. I recognise you have a mixed economy. I recognise you have to provide good levels of training for people in order to promote manufacturing industry and so on in Britain. But what they seem to have forgotten is that the real problems facing Britain are actually grotesque levels of inequality that are getting worse. The training gap for many young people who are not qualified sufficiently to go into work anyway, and that means more investment in education for all students, irrespective of their likelihood of gaining A star plus, etc. And I think we also need to look at the levels of child poverty in Britain, which means ending the benefit cap, the two-child benefit cap, and paying proper benefits and not taking $5 billion out of the benefit budget, which is going to affect people with disabilities. So I think saying you support business in investment in manufacturing industry, I've no problem with that. That was in our manifestos as well. But you've also got to look at the issues of social injustice and social inequality.
So in Switzerland, we have mandatory military service for all men over the age of 18. It remains a relatively popular idea. In the UK, Rishi Sunak in 2024 tried to propose a similar thing. What were your views at the time?
I don't want compulsory military service in Britain. The only times it's ever happened was in the First World War from 1916 to 1918. It only lasted maybe to only 3 years. And the Second World War from 1940. National service continued after the Second World War, in which every young man had to go into the services from 1945 to about 1960. And it was then ended because the military didn't want it. They said, we don't particularly want people in the military, you don't really want to be there, and we haven't got very much for them to do, and so they want it ended. Nobody in any of the services, Royal Navy, Royal Air Force or Army, wants military service brought back. There is, in my view, no demand for it. In that sense, they don't feel the need for it. And so I do not support it. What I do want to see is a higher level of voluntary involvement in society by young people in particular. So I quite like the idea of, for example, we have volunteer cadet groups in the fire service and other services like that, which I think is fine, because it gives young people in school, particularly the sort of later years of secondary school, an opportunity to work in something else and get some experience of ordered and more disciplined environment. But military service, no.
Well, you've always advocated for a peaceful end to the conflict in Ukraine, and you signed a statement from Stop the War saying that there needs to be a peaceful end to this conflict. So what do you think the current Labour government is doing incorrectly to try and bring about an end to this conflict, and what would you have done differently?
I think on election in 24, the important statement ought to have been, we want to bring an end to this war. Now, the war is awful, for sure, and I think Britain and the European Union didn't do enough to try and head off the Russian invasion of Ukraine, didn't do enough to engage with Russia at that time. There was some engagement, but in my view, nothing like enough. And there could have been, I believe, the opportunity that in April 23, there was the possibility of a ceasefire deal, which was something like a recreation of the Minsk agreement of the past. This was apparently vetoed by Boris Johnson, who said that he didn't want anything to do with that, and managed to persuade the Zelensky government not to accept it or sign it or even negotiate within it. And so that opportunity was missed. We've now had this horrendous war. Just get it clear on the record, Russia is wrong. They should not be invading Ukraine. They should not be trying to occupy Ukraine. They ought to be negotiating over the issue of Russian-speaking people on the border with Russia. That's what the Minsk agreement was about. And I hope now that the possibility of a ceasefire is real and will actually happen. The fact that Ukraine and Russia are talking about an arrangement not to hit each other's energy supplies, to allow the export of grain out of Odessa and the export of grain out of Russian ports through the Black Sea and through the Bosphorus, shows that they're perfectly capable of talking to each other. So I do think we will get a ceasefire at some point, hopefully very soon, because Ukraine has been the war ground of Europe for 500 years. Every time Russia has been in conflict with Western Europe, be it under Napoleon, be it when Hitler tried to invade Russia, and so on, Ukraine has been the place where the wars have fought out. Millions of people have died from these wars. Let's stop them and have a negotiation. I think the UN has been ineffective when it could have been so much more effective. Maybe they were being held back by the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, not entirely sure. But well done the late Pope Francis for trying to engineer a ceasefire, well done the African Union for trying the same, and various Latin American presidents who also tried to intervene, because this war, the only people that benefited from it are the arms dealers in the West and in Russia.
Okay, yeah. One of the most shocking reports to come out of the UK this week is the startling gains made by the Reform Party in the local elections. To what do you attribute these victories? Is this a sign that the current government's policies have somewhere gone wrong?
The Reform Party has made significant gains and now have control of a number of very large local authorities, and so they're in a position to administer social education and other services in a number of counties across the country, and they made a great deal of gains. I thought it was eminently predictable. The Labour government has been in office now for less than a year, and during that year has done some good things in passing the Workers' Rights Bill, which is better than what's there before but limited, done something to protect private sector tenants but not protect them from high levels of rent. But also it has cut social security benefits for people, refused to lift the cap on benefits for large families, so that means a family with more than 2 children gets no support for the 3rd, 4th or whatever number of children they have, cut the winter fuel allowance for older people, which is very important for poorer older people to heat their homes, and refused, despite promising it, to compensate what's known as the WASPy women. These are women of a certain age who were not informed about the change in the retirement age, so left work thinking they were going to get a pension, and then found they left their work and had no pension and no means of income until they reached the new retirement age, and they are very, very angry about it. And Labour promised to compensate them in the election campaign, as I did in my own manifestos. And so there's a lot of anger and disillusionment about that, and the promotion of austerity economics. So apart from health, nearly every government, health and defence, every government department is undertaking cuts at the moment. So this has led to a huge level of disillusionment amongst those that voted Labour a year ago in the general election. The Reform Party has spent the past 5 years, and in its previous incarnations as it's had lots of names, now Reform, claiming that all the problems of the country are because of immigration and because of refugees coming to Britain. It's utter nonsense. Britain benefits greatly from migration, from immigrant workers and from those that have made their homes in Britain and gained full status and residence. Our health service could not operate without migrant workers. Our education system could not operate. Our transport system could not operate. The Brexit Party know that when they were called the Brexit Party. The Reform Party know that now that they are the Reform Party. And so they go around the country saying to everybody, all your problems are because of immigration. It's nonsense. The same as Marine Le Pen and her group do in France, the same as the AfD in Germany, and so on, all across the continent. The problem is that conservative parties across Europe are frightened of losing support to the far right, so they move over that way to try and prevent their loss of support. Spanish Conservatives have done that. The French Conservatives have done that. The Social Democratic parties in Germany, France, Britain and Spain have all tilted to the right as well at the same time by saying, well, actually, yes, immigration is a bit of a problem, we have to do something about it. So there's a gap there then. And that gap there is of people who say, well, actually, hang on, we working class are being badly treated, but it's all the fault of immigrants. Enter Reform Party, enter AFD, and gain a lot of support. I think it was wholly predictable. Surely, it's up to the left to say, actually, the structural problems of society are not caused by immigration, not caused by migrants, not caused by refugees. They're caused by an economic system that keeps an increasing number of super rich people super rich, does not control what global corporations are doing, shifting capital investments around, damaging working class communities, and isn't investing in the social services and education that people need. It's the socialist movement having the principles and the determination to go out and explain their cause and deliver on it when they can in government, be it national or local government level. And so I'm looking to the way in which some of the left parties across Europe are challenging this with some success. The Workers' Party in Belgium has done extremely well, not by accepting the immigration argument, but by the opposite. The Die Linke in Germany was on 4% in the election, got up to 9%, not by conceding the round, but by doing the very opposite. And so I think all of us have got to say, if we allow reform and the far right all across Europe to carry on, we're looking at a very horrible future for our continent. One of intolerance, of religious and ethnic diversity, one of an oppressive society damaging minorities all across Europe. Our society and our communities need to come together. I'm very proud of the way young people across Europe have come together to say, not in my name, not in our name.
Another statement that the government has made is that there would be no return to austerity under the current Labour government. So almost a year on since they've been elected, do you think that they've upheld this promise?
No, we still have austerity, and that austerity is continuing. Every local authority in Britain is now faced with a budget crisis. Most of them have enormous debts already because they've been trying to maintain services when they haven't had sufficient money in from central government. In Britain, like most of Europe, local authority expenditure comes 80% from central government, 20% from local taxation. There's a limit to how far you can push local taxation. It's limited anyway to 5% increase per year. And so what we do need is a reinvestment in local services. It's not a loss of money when you invest in education. It's not a loss of money when you invest in care or in good social services. It enables good quality education to go ahead. It enables people who have somebody who needs help and care to be cared for, to enable them to go to work. So it is very short-sighted, and the reintroduction of austerity by Starmer and Reeves in government is very damaging. On June the 7th we're holding a huge march in central London, a People's Assembly march, which will be challenging this whole austerity agenda. And so there is a growing movement against it. And that movement does have the effect, in respect to the last question, of bringing people together of all ages, of all communities. So it is that united force for a fairer, more equal economic future for all.
How will the flight of the rich from the UK, if taxes are raised, potentially negatively affect the country? Or is this a sacrifice that has to be made?
It isn't necessarily inevitable that the rich fly. There is a question of global taxation levels. There is some agreements on what the level of corporation tax should be across all economies. Otherwise you have a race to the bottom of each country reducing its corporate levels of taxation. That's important. But there's also a need for much more effective chasing down of tax avoidance, tax havens, such as the Cayman Islands and other places. And so there has to be international agreement on that, because if we go on a beggar thy neighbour policy of saying, well, okay, we're not going to have a wealth tax or tax the very richest at the level they ought to be taxed at, then because they might go somewhere else, every other government does the same. So you end up with public services across the whole continent, or across the whole world for that matter, being cut and reduced in order not to offend the super rich. Well, we can do better than that. But there has to be international agreement on it. So you do it both ways. One is increasing tax at the top end, a new top end tax rate, and at the same time reaching international agreement, particularly on corporate taxation. We are a global economy increasingly dominated by a very small number of incredibly super rich people. It's not healthy.
Recently in the UK, the Supreme Court ruled on how a woman should be defined.
Mm-hmm.
And how sex-based rights will be applied in the UK. What are your opinions on how this will affect the future of the country?
It's happened. The court ruling is there. They've made their definition. What I feel worried about is that the anti-trans and movement has become stronger as a result of it. As far as I'm concerned, trans rights are human rights and they should be respected as such, and we should respect the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which respects all elements of diversity within our society, and also the European Convention on Human Rights and the European Convention on Human Rights case law, which protects the rights of trans people. I'm worried about that, so I support the rights of trans people.
With the rise of AI in recent years, there have been worries about these having negative effects on workers' rights. Has the current government done anything to try and protect workers in vulnerable jobs?
Yes, there is legislation that's going to be going through the British Parliament on controls of AI. Now, AI is a development of the supercomputer model, it's development of the principle around algorithms. It is almost at the level, not quite there yet, of the thinking computer. That is probably some way off. Now, at one level you can admire the technology and the brilliance that goes with it, and it is brilliant. But the other one you can sort of feel slightly, if not very nervous, about the power of a technological system to decide what we do, what we think, what we say and what we do. And I find decision making in public service issues such as allocation of benefits, even immigration decisions and refugee decisions, increasingly put through a computer system which comes up with a recommendation, an AI recommendation. Now, if it's a recommendation which is then assessed by a human being, any one of the three of us, for example, we can look at it rationally and say, well, this is fair or this is unfair. But you are looking at it. Where it becomes very problematic is if no human being is involved at any stage in that process whatsoever. And that then becomes, to me, quite frightening. So I'm not against AI. I see AI as a device, as a use, as something of technical brilliance that can help us and can be quite useful in predicting and assessing dangers, for example, of electricity network breakdown, water supply, etc., and even weather patterns and all that. But that you have to maintain the human element in it. And if you bring AI into employment practices, are we then going to be selected for jobs on the basis of an AI program? And what's in that AI program? If, for example, it includes on application forms people's names, it's not difficult, taking the average surnames all across Europe, to work out where that family or name has come from, what the ethnicity of that person is. You could actually have an AI built-in system of discrimination. There shouldn't be, obviously not. But so you have to look very, very carefully at the principles of how AI operates, which means, in the case of your question around employment, that means employment rights are very important, and the right to be represented by an independent trade union is very important as well. So it's improving workers' representation, workers' rights that's so important.